Sheila Sharp was returning home from the neighbor's house in the early morning of April 11th, 1981. When she entered cabin 28 of the Keddie Cabin, she stumbled upon a disturbing crime scene where her mother, brother, and brother's friend were murdered and her little sister was nowhere to be found. This is the case of the Keddie Cabin murders. Hello, welcome back to my channel where I deep dive into true crime, paranormal, phenomena, cults, and history. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for everyone who watched my first video back. I appreciate you. But without further ado, let's get into today's case. Today's case takes place in Keddie, California. Keddie is a small town in the Sierra Nevada mountains between Redding, California, and Reno, Nevada. There was only one road to the town and it had a population of 100 for decades. This has declined in recent years and I'm sure this case did not help. The town was named after its founder, Arthur W. Keddie, and was originally a railroad town, but has been in recession since the 1970s when the Keddie railroads shut down. It was revamped in 1978 as a resort town, but it was on a decline when the case occurred, and the murders completely put an end to the once booming tourism. I'm discussing the brutal murder of the Sharp family, also referred to as the Keddie Cabin murders. This is their story. The Sharp family consisted of Sue Sharp and her 5 children, John, Sheila, Tina, Rick, and Greg. Sue was born on March 29, 1945 in Springfield, Massachusetts as Glenna Susan Davis. She married John Sharp when she was only 20. They had their first son, John Jr., on November 16, 1965. A year later, they had their first daughter, Sheila, followed by Tina in 1968. They went on to have their younger sons, Rick and Greg. The family resided in Connecticut, but John became emotionally and physically abusive, so they decided a change might help, so they relocated to the Carolinas. This, however, did not help, and the breaking point was when he allegedly sexually abused their daughter. They ended up divorcing in 1980. She relocated with the children to Northern California to live near her brother, Don. They moved into a trailer in Quincy, California. John was her eldest son, who was either 15 or 16 at the time of the case. He was described as cocky and full of himself, independent, and sometimes got into normal teenage trouble. Sheila, who was 14, was mature and down to earth. Tina, who was 12, was described as quiet, well-mannered, trusting, but a bit guarded. Tina looked up to her older sister, Sheila. She finds secret places in the house to be alone. She did, however, have a few close friends and was an average preteen girl. Rick, who was 10, was similar to his mom, Sue, and was quiet and timid, whereas Greg, who was 5, favored his brother, John, and he was very outgoing. In November of 1980, Sue moved the family again to a cabin in Keddie, California, where the awful murder would eventually take place. They were called the Keddie Resort Cabins, but they were fixer-uppers. They began as resort cabins, but later became low-income cabins as tourism declined. The family moved into cabin 28. This was a small cabin with 2 bedrooms and a basement. Sue and her 2 daughters stayed in 1 bedroom, and her younger 2 sons, Greg and Rick, shared the 2nd bedroom, and the basement was used for additional bedroom for John. Sue left the doors unlocked. This was common at the time, and her reasoning was to allow John to use the bathroom and access to the kitchen. Sue actually worked several part-time jobs in Quincy. When they first arrived in Quincy, the family survived on a portion of John Sr.'s military stipend and food stamps. Soon, Sue worked at a local lodge and attended typing classes at Feather College, so she was receiving a part-time income plus student stipend. Some sources had referred to her as a neglectful parent, but listen, being a single mom is difficult, and a lot of times you end up taking the sole responsibility for supporting your children. She had 5 children. She did what she needed to support her children and put food on the table. Despite working a lot, she still needed extra help from the government, and let's be clear, there's nothing wrong with receiving extra help. The whole family seemed to fit into the move, and the children adapted to the change in environment. They seemed to be good kids and were even left alone while Sue worked without issue. Around the same time, the Sharp family moved into the cabin. The Smartt family did as well. The family included Marilyn. She moved in with her husband, Martin Smartt, and her 12-year-old son, Justin. Justin was from her past marriage, so Martin was his stepfather. He previously was living with his father in Montana, but moved in with his mother and stepdad. Marilyn became good friends with Sue, and in turn, Greg and Ricky became close with Justin. Justin would sleep over at the Sharp families, often alongside a boy named Jamie Sebald. Marilyn confided in Sue about her marriage problems with Martin. She said she wanted to leave him. Sue encouraged her to leave because honestly she did not like him, and he also disliked her eldest son John and was awful to him. Case. He was diabetic and chose to avoid alcohol and marijuana for those reasons as well. I did see on a source he was on probation for giving a cat insulin, which is sick, I'm not gonna lie. And he also damaged lights at the airport. He was also quite the womanizer, as Brittany would say, and he even had relations with a 27-year-old woman. I'm sure Sue was a little hesitant about Dana, but she was happy that Johnny made a friend. But I mean, two things can be true. You can have made bad choices, but also change for the better. Perhaps Sue saw him making changes to be a better person. Now, I did see it reported that Sue was concerned about John using marijuana, as he actually got into some trouble where he stole marijuana from a small-time dealer. But they worked out a deal where he could chop wood for him to settle his debt. Another time, John and Dana got a ride to Quincy where they robbed a home for marijuana and sheets of acid. He got into a fight a week before the case took place, and he received a black eye. By the end of the case, they seem to have settled down their wild behaviors. Around 11:30 a.m. on April 11th, 1981, Sue was driving with Sheila and Greg to pick up Rick from Quincy at the Meeks house, a family friend, where he was attending a baseball tryout at Grinsper Field. Richard Meek actually had a baby with Sheila, but they put up for adoption. It seems like a weird family dynamic, but I guess it happens. When Sue got to the Meeks, she called Sheila, who was at her friend Alice's, and then picked her up to head back to Keddie. Here they saw John and Dana trying to hitchhike back to Keddie, so she took them along. They were hanging out with Richard at the holiday market earlier that day. The boys enjoyed partying, so normal teenage stuff. That night they were going to go to a party. They went back to Keddie so John could change his clothes, and then they hitched a ride back to Quincy. Hitchhiking was a normal thing back then, but extremely dangerous, so do not do that. I just had to put a warning because it bothers me when I see people do that in cases. Anyways, a woman named Donna Williams dropped them off at a tire store in Quincy. Their friend lived down the road. Then they were later seen at a party. Now, Sue did allow them to go out that night as long as they did not hitchhike, but sometimes teenagers don't do what we advise them to do. Back in Keddie, Sue, Greg, Rick, and Justin Smartt stayed at Cabin 28 watching the Love Boat before retiring to bed around 10 p.m. Sheila and Tina went next door to Cabin 27 to spend the night at the Sebald, to spend time with their friend Alyssa. They went to the Sebalds at 8 p.m. and spent the night. The Sebalds consisted of Jamie, his wife Sonita, and their children Alyssa, Paul, and Jane. At 9:30 p.m., Tina asked for the time and then headed back to Cabin 28. Sheila returned to Cabin 28 at 7:45 a.m. the following morning. When she entered the cabin, she smelled the strong smell of death. First off, she saw blood everywhere. She saw bodies tied together, but could not identify which bodies were present. I am sure that this was very traumatic to discover. She did recognize a body as her brother Johnny when she looked more thoroughly. She frantically began to look for her mother Sue, but all she could focus on was a bloody hammer and a knife that was severely bent. Sheila was completely distraught. She dropped her bags on the floor and ran back to the Sebald's cabin. She was screaming hysterically for help. Jamie Sr. and Zonita did not have a phone in their cabin, so they went to a nearby lodge to call the authorities, while Jamie Jr. was tasked with checking on Cabin 28. I know what you're probably thinking. Why would you send your kid to check on a murder scene as the killer could still be in the home? Regardless, Jamie headed to Cabin 28, walked around it, looked through the windows, and went inside. They walked into the living room, checked for survivors, then went back outside and looked through the windows, where they found Greg, Rick, and Justin all alive in the back bedroom asleep. Somehow they slept through the whole ordeal. Jamie then opened the window, woke the boys up, and helped them get the survivors through the bedroom window and avoid walking through the crime scene and to shield them from witnessing the brutal murder. Shortly after 8 a.m., the Pumas County police officers, along with the sheriff's officers, arrived at the scene. Don, Sue's brother, also came to the scene. Police walked through with Don to identify the bodies. As you can understand, this is very difficult for Don. He walked out of the room multiple times before he could look long enough to identify Sue. At first, then his nephew Johnny and his friend Dana Wingate. I mean, the crime scene was horrific, to say the least. There was blood everywhere. We're talking about blood on the walls, ceiling, pools of blood, bloody knife showing a brutal struggle. Investigators found 2 knives, one of which was found on the floor and was a steak knife that was severely bent, meaning that it was used with so much force that it bent. They also found the hammer on a table, a pellet gun, a single pellet, which led the investigators to believe the pellet gun was used in the murders. Investigators noticed that they were bound with over 22 feet of medical tape and electrical wires from appliances and extension cords. Previously to the murders, the Sharp family did not have any medical tape in the cabin, so the killers must have brought the tape with them to the crime scene. Sue was found under a bloody yellow blanket wearing a robe, missing her underwear, which was found in her mouth, along with a roll of tape held in place by an extension cord. The extension cord was also used to bind her legs and ankles. There was no apparent signs of sexual assault on Sue, but why else would she be half naked? Maybe it was personal to embarrass her, because it seemed like they targeted Sue more, and the boys were just in the way, but I'll get more into theories at the end. Like I said a few moments ago, the yellow blanket was soaked in blood. The investigators soon determined that Sue was stabbed in the chest and had her throat slashed. A Daisy 880 BB gun was also used to hit her in the head. Johnny's hands were tied with electrical wire, along with his feet that were bound to Dana's feet, and Johnny's throat was also slashed, and he was beaten using a claw hammer and stabbed multiple times all over his body, including the throat. Dana, however, was beaten with a different hammer and strangled to death. There was lots of blood found on the floor in the living room. However, there was no blood under the bindings or no defensive wounds, meaning that they were probably bound prior to their murders. Unlike Sue, who had defensive wounds and was tied a lot tighter than the boys, she put one hell of a fight. While the BB gun was not found, they found pellets in the rifle sight. Police theorized that the gun hit Sue with enough force to break. All 3 of the victims' feet were covered in blood, indicating that they walked in blood at some point, but police are unsure of the circumstances of this. I think at least one of them was attacked and then made to walk in the area where they were later murdered. Rick, Greg, and Justin all said that they never heard anything and must have slept through the murder. This may be because they were forced to comply with the gun, unaware that it was only a BB gun. But a couple in nearby cabin 16 heard muffled groaning and screaming. This was around 1 a.m. However, it stopped and they did not know the origin of the sound, so they basically ignored it. Other neighbors recalled seeing a green Aston Martin Vantage parked outside the Sharps' cabin. Other neighbors saw a brown car. Now, John and Dana hitchhiked, so these could have been from either one of those vehicles. Back at the crime scene, they found dried blood on a doorknob to a back bedroom. The murder seemed to be very planned, as they also unplugged the phone, so they had no way to call for help. Remember, this was 1981, so no cell phone. So they had no way to call for assistance. There was also no sign of forced entry, but as I said earlier, Sue left the doors unlocked, which explains the lack of a break-in. Hours after the investigation, the investigators finally realized that the 12-year-old daughter, Tina, was missing. This is when they brought the FBI to investigate the murders with them. On Tina's bed, there was blood, pointing toward her disappearance being motivated by sexual assault. There was no trace of Tina, and it did not help that because they had not realized she was missing, the police were several hours behind. On top of this, they failed to secure the scene properly. We're talking about contamination of evidence by walking through the crime scene without taking proper precautions. They did end up conducting a search covering a 5-mile radius. They put out all points bulletin, including canine searches. They displayed FBI posters featuring Tina. Originally, they thought maybe she was the target of the whole thing, because why else would she presumably be taken? We have already talked a little bit about the Smartt family. It consisted of Martin Smartt, his wife Marilyn, and his stepson Justin. Police interviewed Justin Easton's stepfather, Martin Smartt. He told them that his friends, Severin John Bobede, or Bo, was temporarily staying with the family. They met a few weeks prior, while they both were receiving treatment for PTSD at a local VA hospital. In case you're somehow unfamiliar, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and you can get this from any traumatic event, such as car accidents, fire, abusive situations, sexual assaults, etc. In Martin and Bo's situation, it was due to their military service in Vietnam. The night of April 11th, Martin went to the backdoor bar with Marilyn and Bo. Martin actually worked as the chef at the bar. They asked Sue if she wanted to join before heading to the bar, but she declined. At the bar, Martin complained loudly about the music. They ended shortly after, and the trio went back to their cabin. Marilyn watched TV for a while, then went to bed. Martin called the manager about the music and complained. He seems like such a delight. The men then returned to the bar, so I guess the manager resolved the music selection. The Pumis sheriff contacted Department of Justice investigators, Harry Bradley and P.A. Krim, to interview the family further. Marilyn told them that she and Martin had separated the day after the murders because he was very angry, violent, and abusive. Martin then left for Reno, Nevada. He wrote Marilyn a letter saying, quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we're through," end quote. She brought this letter to the police. Now I must explain that he had 4 children with the woman he left for Marilyn. So this could be about abandoning his children, or it could be about the case. The lead detective resigned and worked in a different area around that time. Around the time he resigned, there was a lot of rumors that he knew who committed the murders, and instead of doing his job, he told him to leave, and he left as well. Martin also passed a polygraph, but I have to say that these are not always accurate and not credible in court. Despite that, the 3 of them were cleared of suspicion. It was also known that the sheriff was buddy-buddy with Martin, so suspicion flew that he could be covering up the murders. But he denied this, saying he had them take a polygraph. Marilyn was interviewed later and said that Martin hated John. She also told them that the next day on April 12th, he was burning things in the fireplace. Justin previously told investigators that he did not hear or see anything, but later changed his story. He talked about a dream where he was on a boat with the family. He saw John and Dana fighting with a man with long black hair and a mustache. He had a hammer in his hand. During the argument, the man tossed John and Dana overboard. He also said that Dana was extremely intoxicated. He saw a sheet covering a body, which turned out to be Sue. He realized she had a wound on her chest, so he attempted to help her by putting pressure on the wound with a rag. When this would not work, he threw the rag into the water. This does line up with her injuries, so maybe it's coming into his dreams in a different location. He was hypnotized and then polygraphed. This is when he told the polygrapher that he had heard a noise and peeked out the door. He saw Sue lying on the sofa. There were 2 men standing in the middle of the room, one with blonde hair and between 5'11" and 6'2". The other had brown hair and army boots and was 5'6" to 5'10". Both men wore gold glasses. John and Dana entered the room. A fight ensued. Dana attempted to escape through the kitchen, and this is when the man with the brown hair hit him with a hammer. Meanwhile, John was being attacked by the other man. Sue was now up trying to help her son. Justin was hiding behind the bedroom door, but saw the men tying the boys up. Tina then entered the room with a blanket in hand and then asked what was going on. The men grabbed Tina and left out the back door with the 12-year-old, or she did try to cry for help. The man with the glasses stabbed Sue in the chest with a pocket knife. Justin helped to create composites for the suspects. Sue's ex-husband, Jim, was one of the first suspects as they divorced when he was known to be abusive. He has a pretty strong motive. They surveyed Jim for several days. He sat down for an interview and asked if he killed his wife and kidnapped his daughter, Tina. Jim had an airtight alibi and was cleared of suspicion. They heard rumors of Sue engaging in sex work and drugs, but this was dismissed quickly. There were no drugs in the cabin, and Sheila was adamant that her mother had no involvement in these activities. The main suspects that people believe to be the perpetrators are Martin, Smartt, and Bo. Even Pumis authorities think the DOJ agents massively dropped the ball on these 2 idiots. There are obvious discrepancies. For example, Bo claimed he had served as a Chicago police officer for 18 years before he retired. This is easily verifiable. He also said that Marilyn is his niece, which is a blatant lie. He also said that she was awake when they returned home, which contradicted her story. She was already asleep when they got back to the cabin. He said he never met Sue, but all three of them went to her home before they went to the bar. Martin insinuated that Justin, his stepson, may have seen something when he did not detect him. Weird choice of words. Martin discussed the hammers in the murder, saying that he lost his own hammer, but that did not give off any red flags. They cleared them without any question in any of this. Martin also had one hell of a motive. He did not like John because he saw him as a troublemaker, and Sue was encouraging Marilyn to leave him because of his abusive ways. Both Martin and Bo had extensive criminal records, especially Bo. He was in and out of prison for years for organized crime in Chicago. It is rumored that he worked for the mob in Las Vegas. Marilyn said that she was suspicious of the men. Bo asked out Sue, and she turned him down. Later at the bar, Bo said that he felt like killing someone. She told him that they were burning things in the fireplace. They were wearing different clothes than they had been wearing earlier. They were wearing three-piece suits and sunglasses. This is a weird outfit if they're just going to a dive bar. It is theorized that they wore this to stand out as a form of an alibi. Pumis Sheriff Doug Thomas also let organized crime detectives take over questioning, which is weird because they're not experienced in kidnapping and murder cases, only drug cases. It's really like they did not want to solve this case. Bradley and Krim talked to previous residents of Cabin 28 on June 4th, 1981. He said he moved 2 weeks before the family moved in and did not know them. He did say he heard that weeks before the murder happened, a man was yelling at Sue for 30 minutes. I am talking a volatile fight with cursing back and forth, but this never came of anything. We talked before about how the boys were into drugs and got into some trouble for this. This was a line of suspicion. There was no actual proof. This is what happened. They also looked at people at the party the boys attended because, parties have drugs sometimes. This was also dismissed very fast. They looked at the people who drove them back to Keddie when they hitchhiked, but they were cooperative and cleared as suspect. Tina had a teacher named Joel Walker Lipsy, who was fond of her in a very weird way. He was creepy and even had a picture of Tina at his desk. He visited Cabin 28 that night, unrelated to the case, but he was also arrested for molesting a little girl. Regarding the murders, he also had an alibi, and there was no evidence to suspect him any further. So he is a piece of trash, just not the piece of trash who murdered this family. They went from thinking that Tina was the target to thinking it was a distraction. Sheila believed her mother was the main target in the boys, and Tina just got in the way. The FBI was investigating Tina's disappearance, but 18 days after her family was murdered, they backed off, saying the California DOJ was doing an adequate job and the presence was unnecessary. The search for Tina slowed down until 3 years after the murder. On April 11th, 1984, Ronald Pedrini was collecting bottles at Cap 18 near Feather Falls, 30 miles from Keddie. It is speculated that he was told about the remains, but there's no real evidence for this. Anyways, he found a human skull. During a different search, they found additional bones. They also found a child's blanket, a blue nylon jacket, a pair of jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty medical tape dispenser. After the discovery, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received a anonymous phone call saying that the skull belonged to Tina Sharp. The caller asked, "I was wondering if they had thought of the murder up in Keddie in Palmas County a couple years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found." Unfortunately, they did not document this call, and the recording was lost until discovered at the bottom of an evidence box in 2013. In June 1984, a forensics pathologist identified the bones belonging to Tina using her dental records. A few weeks after being initially cleared, both Martin and Bo moved out of the area. Martin relocated to Reno, Nevada shortly after the murders, and then settled down in Klamath, California, which is roughly 314 miles away from Keddie. Bo moved clear across the country back to Chicago. Martin confessed to a counselor at the Reno VA. He said that he wanted to clear his conscience. He also said he did it because Sue was trying to get Marilyn to leave him. He confessed to Sue and Tina and only killed Tina as she was a witness. He denied killing the boys. So he's saying he murdered 2 of the victims and then someone else killed John and Dana. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay. As dumb as that sounds, that is his story. They report this to the police, but it is dismissed as hearsay. He also said that it is easy to beat a polygraph test. He confirmed his friendship with Sheriff Thomas and even let him live with him for a little while. In 2004, 23 years after the murder, Cabin 28 was demolished. I'm not really sure what took so long, honestly. In 2016, a man using a metal detector near the Keddie property found a blue-handed claw hammer that looked similar to the one Martin had said gone missing. By 2018, a new sheriff, Greg Hagwood, took over the case. He was actually known to the Sharp family. When the case occurred, he was 16 years old, so you can say this was personal for him. He said of them finding the hammer, quote, "The location where it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced," unquote. In April 2018, around the 37-year mark, they announced that DNA evidence was recovered from a living suspect on a piece of tape found at the crime scene. The belief is that there is an accomplice out there that's still alive, saying, quote, "There are people locally that know more than they have said, and I believe we have identified some of them, and we know who they are, and we know where they are, and I have every confidence that they either participated after the fact or they have first-hand information," end quote. Unfortunately, if they committed the crime, they will never see justice, as Bo died in 1988 of natural causes. Martin died in 2000 of cancer in Portland, Oregon. As for the survivors, Sheila, Rick, and Greg, they were returned to living with their father. This one concerns me as it was said that he was abusive. I truly hope that they had as normal childhood as possible. When told that Tina was found, Sheila had hoped that she was going to be reunited with her sister, but unfortunately, she had to grieve her all over again. The most widely believed theory is that there was a love triangle between Sue, Martin, and Marilyn. It's believed that Martin was cheating on Marilyn with her friend Sue, who was also trying to convince Marilyn to leave Martin. Martin eventually did find out and was angry, so it's theorized that he may have planned the murder with Bo. It would explain why Marilyn left Martin the following day and why the younger boys were spared. He already did not like John, so they could have just been in the way. You can also relate the letter to his theory. We also have the fact that he confessed to the counselor with the VA, and that he had a history of violence on different occasions, pulling a knife on her and even attempted to hit her and Justin with his car. The lesser believed theories include ex-love interests of Sue Sharp and drug angle. Sue's ex-husband was cleared immediately, and she dated 3 men since moving to Keddie. None of the relationships ended up becoming serious. They seem to be ruled out, but I guess anything is possible as the early police work sucked. We spoke about drug use by John and Dana, so the theory is that they ripped off the wrong person and Sue was in the way. It is very unlikely because murder is an extreme over a little bit of pot and LSD. They also let the younger boys survive in the back room. It just seems more personal. And the final known theory is robbery gone wrong. There's nothing stolen from the cabin, and the family were struggling financially. They had everything they needed, but Sue worked to get the main needs taken care of. The murders were especially heinous for a simple robbery. Normally, they may shoot you and leave, not torture you. Also, let's not forget they kidnapped and murdered Tina. This seems very personal. Now, what do I think happened? I'm definitely close to the whole Martin and Bo theory. I think motive was either convincing Marilyn to leave her abusive situation, turning Bo down, or both. Honestly, there was a lot of anger in her murder. She had to be the target, in my opinion. There was other DNA of a living suspect, which is undeniable. I think they have had help covering it up, and some of that could have been from local law enforcement. It just seems like clear corruption. I would also like to give advice when possible. This is never to blame victims. I think we learn from past mistakes. The main concern was the unlocked door. I understand this was a different time. The area was quiet and it allowed John access to the home. Most people lock their doors now. I personally would never leave my doors unlocked. I have seen recent cases in smaller towns where the doors are left unlocked. We saw this recently in the Idaho 4 case. What theory do you believe in most? I want to know your opinion, but please be respectful. I believe in rational decisions that we can draw of individual life experiences and perspectives. Comment, subscribe, and like. If you have any future cases you'd like me to cover, please request a case using my form in the description. Now I'm going to attempt to stick to a regular schedule. My next Wicked Wednesday will be next week, but in the meantime, I will see you on Friday for Freaky Fridays, when I discuss a case for my morbid history series on a set of beliefs that have been truly misunderstood. Thanks for remembering Sue, John, Dana, and Tina with me today. Until next time, stay curious, cautious, and safe. Bye.